Can we criticize and edify at the same time? As a matter of fact, you can. It's called critique, which is balanced and constructive. One seeks to find fault or the negative, while the other respects the intent while offering advice on doing better. And that's what this episode is about. All right. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. Tuning in live, then I especially thank you for giving me your time so early. And I do apologize for starting late, just running behind this morning, trying to get things wrapped up and ready. Wasn't able to get all of my notes in order for this show, but that's okay. I think we're going to manage. We will be just fine. The show must go on. So, again, thank you for tuning in. You know, one thing I find enjoyable, which may sound weird to you, is evaluating the claims of what people say. It's driven more so by a curiosity of whether a given claim is true. Um, but sometimes maybe it's fun to kind of dunk on somebody, right? But often the reality is it's because the claim is a precursor to some sort of suggested solution. So I'm very curious, like, is this problem really a problem? Is it a problem in the sense that somebody is presenting it? Because if it is, then the solution may be correct. But if it's not, well, then maybe the solution isn't so correct. So, what drives today's episode? I recently saw a video clip on Twix. That's what I'm calling it now, by the way. It's a merging of Twitter and X. And Musk may not like it, but hey, it's the way it goes. So, I saw a video on Twix claiming that there was a 59% suicide rate for transgender individuals who were denied the opportunity to use the bathroom they believed best suited them. And let me go ahead and pull that just bring that up really quickly here for you. So here it is. It's from is it Ollie London says this is what he says. A man wearing a dress claims there is a 59% suicide rate when transgender biological men are denied entry into women's bathrooms or restrooms. And then he quotes him. He says, for transgender individuals who have been denied equal access to bathrooms at work, there is a 59% suicide rate. And then he has like a 2-minute clip. So most of the comments were pretty like scoffing and mockery. I mean, it's Twitter, right? Twix. Sorry. It's Twix. Like that's how it goes. You get on there, you put a video, and people can be outright vicious. But I'm Liberty Dad. And my goal is to lead the way with a better conversation, to edify. So I dug up the full video and then I set out to fact check the claim. And then I was watching it and I said, I had just recently talked about public speaking and Toastmasters and how we could all be better speakers. So then I thought, what if I combine the two rather than just, look and say, all right, what do the facts say? How factual are the claims? But then also look and say, how do they present? Did they do well in their presentation? And you might say, well, why would you do that? Well, if you're watching the show, I want you to try to get the most out of the show that you can possibly get. And so I thought, maybe you're an aspiring speaker, or maybe you could just use a few extra tips. So I thought, hey, why not? I'll give it a shot. Let's see if we can combine the two and evaluate this video as fairly and earnestly as possible. That's the goal today. So let's go ahead and let's see. We're gonna watch this, and then after we watch it, we're gonna go and evaluate the claims that are in the video. All right. And through as I'm playing the video, I'll stop it periodically, because it's a 6 minute video. I'm not just going to play a 6 minute video and just sit there silent, but I'll play it and then I'll stop at different points. And then we'll have some conversation about what I'm watching. Now, I'm going to save the facts for the end. So at the very beginning, we're just going to give a critique on the presentation, the style, and so on and so forth. And then after that, then we're going to talk about the facts of the matter. So let's go ahead and get into that. So let me pull that up on the screen here, and then we will be able to just simply go through and see what we can learn about public speaking, and then about the matter of transgender suicide rate at 59%. So, and here we are. Let's get to it. I probably should have at the very beginning, but it is what it is.
There is nothing more American than baseball in the summertime. The fans.
All right, so we're going to stop right here. So what's the critique right here? So you can see this person, and I believe her name is Adeline. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. So first and foremost, thing that I noticed, we got the clasped hands here. So this is not necessarily a good thing for public speaking. What you want to do is you want to present yourself as open. Generally, what they say is like if you've got your clasp, if you're like this, you're kind of bunching up your shoulders, then what that kind of indicates is that you're not comfortable being there. Now, why is that important? Well, when you are giving information, when you're giving a speech, what you want to do is communicate an idea. It doesn't matter what the idea is. You're communicating an idea. You want the audience to take away some idea, to learn something from you. So, the first thing that you're going to want to make sure is that you're not presenting as if you are lacking any confidence. Because if you lack confidence, then that quickly means that the audience can lack confidence in what you're saying. Now, here's a rule of thumb that somebody told me once, because once upon a time, DL was really nervous about public speaking, and this comes from the tech community. And locally, I was involved with a Ruby programming language group, and they would have like a monthly meetup, and they would invite people to come and speak in front of people. And so they were like, "Hey, Deal, you want to speak?" And I was really nervous because I'm like, a lot of these guys they know a lot more about programming than I do. Like, what am I gonna teach you guys, right? Like, and what if I make a mistake? And what if this? And what if that? And the greatest piece of advice that I'd ever received from somebody about public speaking, he said, "Look, you're invited to come and speak. You belong there." He goes, "What that means is somebody who is running the show has determined that you were good enough to get on stage and speak at their event. So you need to act like it." So I mean, I think he said it a little bit more kindly than that, but that's basically the gist. So class pans, don't do that. All right, let's continue.
The food, the game. Eating popcorn and cheering for the home team is one of my favorite childhood memories. I often reflect on the game of baseball and can't help but see its similarities to the LGBT movement for equality.
Okay. So starting off, you always need some kind of like icebreaker, right? Like something to kind of get the crowd pulled in. What you want to do is you want the crowd. Um, you're getting up. They don't necessarily know who you are, so you have to kind of get their attention. Whatever it is, they may have their phone and they're sitting there playing on their phone. So you need to say something immediately so that it grabs their attention and they go, "Oh, I better really pay attention to this." Right. So that's what this person is doing at a line, I believe. That's what she is doing is starting off with the story. Hey, I love baseball, something that's relatable. Like most people can relate to baseball, even if we didn't play it. Sometimes people will give, a joke. That can be very difficult, but sometimes people will start a converse, start a speech with a joke, or they'll come out and they'll say something kind of loud or whatever. So there's all kind of ways to get the audience's attention. So that's what's going on here. Kudos to that. I would have probably been like, if I'm critiquing at a line, like, personally, and I were looking at it, I would say, when you give the introduction about baseball, inflect your voice more, right? So, I would go back and say something like, I love baseball. And you might even ask the audience, who here also enjoys baseball or other sports? Right. And so you kind of that kind of gives you an opportunity to inflect your voice a little bit, be grab their attention and then involve the audience because now, if I'm looking on my phone, the person next to me is raising their hand. I'm like, okay, what are they raising their hand about? Right. So let's continue.
Many of you are probably bewildered. Let me explain. The L, the G, and the B are currently running down the third base line for home plate right now. They're not at home plate yet, but they're awfully close. Meanwhile, the T is held up on first base. The transgender community will be stuck on first base for a while if the LGBA communities don't step up to bat again. As a transgender person myself, I am very passionate about transgender rights and educating people on who we are. Every
Okay. So right here, what we see, and I'll try not to stop it too much, too frequently here, but um, she then goes on to, moves on from the idea of, hey, I've got this baseball, this topic that I really enjoy, to now making it an analogy. Okay. So now she's going to, now she's kind of weaving in what she wants to talk about with this introductory story that she gave. She says, okay, well, you've got like the L there on first base and so on and so forth. And so now she's kind of painting this picture. So we all know how the game of baseball plays. And so now she's kind of saying, all right, here is where everybody is on the field. So now we can kind of envision different groups from the LGBT, I think she said the LGBTA community on the field. And then so now she's kind of going into what do I want to talk about? And then she leads with, I am very passionate about this. I see nothing wrong with that, but I don't know that it would be necessary to say that you're very passionate. You're up there speaking, right? Like people talk about things that they're interested in. Likely it's not likely that I'm going to get up and I'm going to give a speech on, something that I'm not passionate about or something that doesn't interest me. So anyway, let's continue on.
day, it hurts to see hateful attacks against the transgender community in the media, often generated by those who have never met a transgender person in their life. The media needs to spend more time covering transgender stories in order to create a more informed society. Unfortunately, the rhetoric is largely centered around the bathroom debate. And the bathroom debate there's a lot of anxiety surrounding this topic.
Okay. So this is a little bit less critique than just letting you know. I think at the very beginning it pointed out this is a talk from 2017. So this is an old talk. So it may not make nearly as much sense if you're watching it now because you're like, wait a minute, bathrooms, like we talked about that years ago. And maybe we still are kind of talking about it, but not quite to the level that we were at the time. So um the other but I will say it is good if you're giving a talk to talk about something that is current. And at the time, it was a huge deal. Like I think this was at the time that South Carolina or North Carolina, whichever one of the Carolinas, was having the really, really big issue with the bathroom debate. So just kind of give you a little background there.
The bathroom debate has been more fear-driven than facts, and for that, we need to change that. For most of you, using a
Okay.
public bathroom
So
is
we're gonna. So you might have noticed, and just let me scroll it back here just a wee bit. So right here, you can see where she is looking down. So I'm going to assume that they have a prompter with all the maybe her notes. I don't really know how it's written. You know, in a 6 minute talk, it's probably better to do your best to memorize as much as you can. And the reason for that is it's only a 6 minute talk, and you should be able to memorize. That way you can focus and look at the audience. Because one of the things that you want to do, and this is very intimidating, but you want to look at the audience because remember, you have just went through the effort to grab their attention. Then she has went through the effort to grab their attention. Then she went and said, all right, well, now we're going to I'm gonna now that I'm using this baseball analogy, now I'm gonna connect it to the topic that I want to talk about, and now I want to get into the details of my topic. So you want to continue having that attention by looking at people because they're going to be if they see you just looking down at your notes, that's going to be a cue in a sense for them to also look away. All right, so let's continue.
of you, using a public bathroom is pretty straightforward.
You can see the hands
You
are still
have the
clasped.
urge to go. You get up and walk into a designated restroom, no questions asked. You do your business. Hopefully, wash your hands.
All right, so there you go. Always good to throw in a nice little joke in the middle of your talk. It kind of reminds the people to participate. And you can hear the laughter in the background, like people are laughing. And if somebody's attention was taken away, the fact that everybody's laughing, if I'm looking on my phone and then I missed the joke and then I hear that everybody's laughing, I go, "Oh, what did I miss?" So then it snaps my attention back to the speaker. So, good job on that.
And continue on your day. However, for the transgender community, that isn't always the case. In the past year, 16 states have considered restricting bathroom usage to biological sex at birth. These bills, in essence, will ban the transgender community from using the restroom of which they identify with. And if you choose to go against these laws and get caught, you will be fined and in some instances, even imprisoned. To push these unjust bills forward, conservative foundations have been running TV ads depicting men going into women's restrooms to harass women and children. They claim that by allowing transgender people to use the restroom of which they identify with, it will enable men to legally go in and harass women and children in the restroom. The facts, anti-discrimination protections covering gender identity have been around for years, and there is no evidence to suggest that they lead to attacks in public facilities. The disappointing truth about these bills, they really only hurt the transgender community, which is already striking out. In a study done by the Williams Institute, it was found that 42% of transgender women age 18 to 96 will attempt suicide in their lifetime. For transgender men, the rate is even higher at 46%. If that statistic isn't bad enough, I have one more to show you. For transgender individuals who have been denied equal access to bathrooms at work, there is a 59% suicide rate.
Okay. So I'm going to pause it here for just a second. So this is the core of what we're going to look at in just a moment. We're going to walk through that Williams Institute study. I went and dug up the study. And so think of just kind of what I want you to remember and put in the back of your mind is what she just said. And let's go back a few seconds and then just a few seconds here.
Percent suicide rate.
Okay. So she said for trans individuals who are denied access to the bathroom that they believe is correct for them, there is a 59% suicide rate. So I want you to keep that in mind. 59% suicide rate. Those exact words. Write it down if you have to. All right, we're going to come back to that in just a moment. But right now, we're just critiquing the talk in itself without worrying necessarily about, what's true, what's not true, whatever.
These bills cause unjust hardship on the transgender community, but small, selfless actions can go a long way in shaping a movement. A perfect example of such actions would be Kelly Herron. Kelly is an avid runner from the Pacific Northwest who was attacked by a sex offender in a public restroom this past March. Luckily for Kelly, self-defense training paid off and she was able to restrain the offender until police arrived. Kelly's story, as heroic as it was, immediately went viral. In the days after, a media group pushing for conservative restricting laws against transgender people in the bathroom took Kelly's story and attempted to use it to fit their political agenda. In this case, stopping transgender pedophiles from using the correct restroom. When Kelly found out about this, she immediately stood up against the hate and fought for something. And that's what this conference is about. And that's why we need to stand with Kelly here. And Kelly isn't alone. Many large entities in the US have also taken a stand against transgender inequality. Organizations like the NCAA.
Okay. So I think I'm gonna stop the video here because everything else is just kind of like finalizing, and I don't think that I have any more critique other than this one final thing. You'll notice that Adeline here doesn't really move about the stage. Now, there's a red circle in the center, and presumably you're supposed to stay within that circle. But as I noted earlier, she has the hands clasped, and then you can kind of see her taking a step here, and it almost looks like a rocking back and forth. That can be distracting. So, one of the things that you want to do when you're a public speaker is learn to somewhat stand still or make your movements very intentional. So you can, if you feel the need to move, you're feeling a little uncomfortable, then take a step, like say to the right, and then look at the right, like the right side of the room. You don't want to do this for very long. You want to do it for like a second, like look over and do it when you're saying something kind of interesting, right? Like don't just do it as part of your talk. So you might say, like if we were talking, if I was giving this very same speech, I might look over and say, and I might look and I say, this percentage of people, the first, there's three stats. So I might say the first stat, and I'm looking over to the left, and then I might look over to the right, and then I might say, here's the second stat, and then I might look dead center and step forward a second, and step forward a little bit, and then say, and if that isn't alarming enough, how about this statistic, right? So now you've basically focused on three major sections of the room: the left, the right, and then the center. And it gives you that opportunity to move a little bit, but your movement is very intentional. And then, of course, accompanied by that would be opening yourself up a little bit and saying, all right, you can't have your clans has your clan, your hands clasped. You can't have them in your pocket. You can't have them behind your back. So you might, kind of use them to help guide your conversation. So that's the final thing that I wanted to talk about because I want to get into the review of the actual information itself. And there's kind of a lot to cover even on those three pieces of information. So that's my advice if you're publicly speaking is to follow some of those tips. One, again, just review really quickly. Don't have your hands together. Don't have them in your pocket. You want to open yourself up. It's intimidating. I get it. But that helps draw the crowd in and keeps them focused on what you're trying to say. I mean, if you're going to go through all of that effort to prepare your speech, to, put on something nice, be there on time, and subject yourself to the whole wide world in this particular case, or just a crowd, you might as well go through the extra effort to make sure you follow some of the best practices as well. Because why do all that if they're not going to take away your message, right? Like really take it away. So that's what you want to do is you want to, open up a little bit, make your movements more distinct and on purpose and then, some of the other things that I mentioned, you could start your speech with something that engages the audience right away, a joke or maybe a story or something along that line, and then connect that story to the topic that you're speaking about. So now let's go to this Williams Institute report. All right, so let's pull that up on the screen there. All right. So this is now, remember, the talk that Adeline gave was from 2017. And to the best of my ability, it appears that the information that she's using is coming from this document, which is from 2014. So it's a little on the old side now, but the video is being posted now, as we saw from Ollie London. He posted the video recently. And so I was curious, like, how did they find out about this 59%? So, this is a report titled "Suicide Attempts Among Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Adults." So let's take a look and see what we find. So I'm gonna. It's an 18-page document. We're gonna identify some things on just several of the pages. You could look it up if you really wanted to read through it. I don't necessarily. I'll put a link to the study or to this report in the show notes. But when you see these videos, I encourage you to look into them and see, do I agree with what the person is saying? Do I agree with the criticism? Most of the criticism was just mean spirited, so that was kind of useless, and I don't think that helps the conversation whatsoever. All right, so let's take a look. Um, so we are going to skip down to page 2, and we're going to look at the executive summary. Make sure that everything is big enough for you to read. You know what? Maybe what I'll do is I'll do this. Let's make it a little bit bigger on the screen so that hopefully you can read it. How about that? Okay, so let's do that. All right, so we're going to scroll up. So it's written, so you've got like a left column and a right column. So I'll start with the right column. This is under the executive summary. So key findings in this report include the following. Make sure I didn't make any mistakes there on that. Okay, perfect. I think that's going to. So suicide attempts among trans men, 46%, and trans women, 42%, same as what Adeline presented, were slightly higher than the full sample, 41%. Okay, so this was the key finding that they found. Another key finding is that those who experienced discrimination or harassment at work had a suicide attempt rate of 50 to 59%. And we'll look at the breakdown of why that's 50 to 59% in just a moment. So this is the executive summary. It just kind of gives you like, here are some of the higher level details. Okay, fine. Nothing to really to concern ourselves with here. So let's move on to page 3 and 4, where there's actually quite a bit to look at. This comes under the methods and limitations. So this is, and I've got a lot highlighted here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I will read the highlighted part because it's very critical in understanding this this claim of 59%. In brief, responses were obtained from 6,456 self-identified transgender and gender nonconforming adults age 18 and over. Then goes on to say, while the NTDS, and that is the national, where'd they go here? That's the national, I lost it, National Transgender Discrimination Survey. So this is a survey that they put out. So that while the NTDS provides a wealth of information about the experiences of transgender and gender nonconforming people, the survey instrument and methodology posed some limitations for this study. First, the NTDS questionnaire included only a single item about suicidal behavior that asked, "Have you ever attempted suicide?" with dichotomized responses of yes and no, or yes or no. Researchers have found that using this question alone in surveys can inflate the percentage of affirmative responses, since some respondents may use it to communicate self harm behavior that is not a quote suicide attempt, such as seriously considering suicide, planning, let's go back up here, planning for suicide, or engaging in self harm behavior without the intent to die. So now, right away, in its own limitations, it says, hey, there is a problem with this question as asked because it can lead to people putting things into the category that don't necessarily fit, which inflate the statistics. So somebody might say, well, this is when I was growing up, this was a terrible thing that people did. But when I was growing up, suicide was very common, and it was usually girls that people were talking about, like, would commit suicide. And so some people would say, well, the way I deal with it is if somebody comes to me talking about they're planning to commit suicide, I'll hand them a knife or a razor blade and say, well, go ahead right now, and then show them they're not serious. Okay. That's a terrible thing to do. Don't ever do that. Okay. Like that, for many reasons that we're not going to get into. But what it does highlight is that there are some people who may be expressing this desire, but don't actually want it. And we need to tease out those who actually want it and those who are what we used to call back in my day a cry for help. Okay. So, two different things. Continuing on, without such probes, we were unable to determine the extent to which the 41% of NTDS participants who reported ever attempting suicide may overestimate the actual prevalence of attempts in the sample. So, without further digging in and talking to people, there's a limitation on how inflated is this? Is it inflated a lot? Is it inflated just a little bit? It might be only inflated a little bit. And so therefore it's not nearly as critical. All right. Second, the survey did not directly explore mental health status and history, which have been identified as important risk factors for both attempted and completed suicide in the general population. So, what they're saying is, hey, there are other factors that may play a huge role. We don't know. We don't know if the people responding had what their mental health status was or their history. So we're just basically asking a question, and these people who are responding are giving us an answer. And so there's some information that we don't know. So continuing on, then it says third, since the NTDS utilized convenience sampling, it is unclear how representative the respondents are of the overall US transgender slash gender nonconforming adult population. Further, the survey's focus on discrimination may have resulted in wider participation by persons who suffered negative life experiences due to anti transgender bias. In other words, there's another reason that this number may be inflated. The reason might be that when you put out this study that says, hey, we want to know about your suicide attempts, then you primarily or maybe even only get people who have thought about it or considered it or even attempted it or what have you. In other words, you may have a large portion or a significant portion of the transgender slash gender nonconforming community who did not participate because they said that doesn't apply to me. So now what ends up happening is you get a higher statistic because the people who it maybe wasn't applicable for, who didn't have that problem, didn't contribute their voice. So therefore, the statistic goes higher, it looks worse. Finally, it should be emphasized that the NTDS, like all similar surveys, captured information about suicide attempts, not completed suicide. Now, at first, I was like, okay, I don't know if that's really relevant here. But then they go on, they say data from the US population at large, however, show clear demographic differences between suicide attempters and those who die by suicide. While almost 80% of all suicide deaths occur among males, about 75% of all suicide attempts are made by females. In other words, there's a big distinction between who attempts suicide and who actually goes through with it, which could tell us a little bit more about the people who are more serious and the people who are less serious. Okay. The people that are, we might consider those who want to die and those who are making a kind of a cry for help, if you will. Okay. So this comes now, mind you, I, I'm not making this up. I'm not dragging it from some other unrelated source. This comes under the methods and limitations for the report that is being cited by Adeline. Okay. That's very important. This information here is very critical when we start putting out facts and figures. And it's important because this happens all the time. I started a long time ago. I would read a news article and I would see some statistic from some study. And then I would go and I would dig up the study. And then I would read it and I would find that statistic in there. But then as I was reading through the study, I would say, well, I don't agree with how it was presented in the news article, right? Or sometimes even worse, the study's own authors would say in the end, like in the discussion portion, they would say something like, this is not meant to mean this. And then I would look at the news article and I would go, that's what they said it meant. Like the news article would literally say, this data, this number means this. But then the study might say, well, it doesn't actually, it shouldn't be considered to mean this because, and then they would go into, the methods and the limitations. Because a lot of times studies give us information which tell us there's more to learn. And without digging in, we've only got a surface level of information here that doesn't tell us a whole lot. For instance, as we were going through these different limitations, um, this report's own limitation said we didn't account for mental health, so we don't know the mental health status, right, of people. What if people have severe depression, right? Like just depression in the standard, you were born and you have depression, not depression that resulted from from your peers and how you were engaged with by other people, but depression that you can't help, that's not driven by those around you. They may be made worse, but it's something that's more natural to you because we in society, we understand that some people have depression and they have to, and it's not a result necessarily, or at least not we can't identify necessarily something specific in the environment that's causing it. So then we assume it's more something that they were born with, that they're predisposed with to. Um, and requires a different approach. So let's continue on. So that's pages 3 and 4, the limitations. So now let's look at the bathroom data because that is very interesting. You might think, well, it's 59%. Like, what's that? How is that interesting? Well, keeping in mind with all of this, what we just read, let's skip over to page 11 and we're going to look at one more. All right. So we're going to scroll here and we see under this table, table 16, lifetime suicide attempts by negative work experiences. And so then they go through and then they have the work experience and then they have the attempted suicide percentage here. And so you got things like I did not get a job I applied for. I lost my job. I was the victim of sexual assault by someone at work, so on and so forth. And then we get down here to the one I highlighted in green. I was denied access to appropriate bathrooms. And then we see that the percentage is indeed 59%. But here's something that we need to consider in addition to all the limitations that we just read, how many of those people experienced all of these or most of these or many of these, right? Because the numbers here suggest, and I'm not looking at the actual data, but the way it's presented, the numbers look like I did not get a job I applied for, 53%. But if we start adding up all these percentages, we go way higher than 100. So it wasn't one of these. It could be that somebody went down the list and said, "Yep, that happened to me. That happened to me. That happened to me. That happened to me." So then we have to consider, okay, in addition to we don't know who is making a cry for help and who really wants to die. We don't necessarily know the demographic data that may lead us to that kind of information. We don't necessarily know who has mental health issues that may be underlying and maybe driving maybe its own driver. Then we have to consider how many people um, would fit this 59% that fit one of these others, because the accumulation of all of these create an even stronger negative life experience. Like if if the only thing that happened to you one time was that you lost your job, right? Because you were transgender. Let's assume that's true. You lost your job because you were transgender, which is up here under the 55%. The question is, would that be enough with all the other things considered to drive you to want to commit suicide? Probably not, right? Now, if you didn't get a job you applied for, you lost the job that you had, you were harassed by people at work, you were a victim of some sort of assault at work, and you were denied the access to the bathroom, well, yeah, all of those things, all those things together might drive you to say, okay, even if I don't have mental health issue, this is a really tough life experience for me. So all these things together may drive me to a particular point. So this is where that information is misleading. Now, earlier I told you to keep in mind, she said a 59% rate. Okay. That's why I believe that she misspoke and she was like, it does say 59%, but what it is 59% of the people that responded who said that they had considered suicide also checked that they were denied access to the bathroom. But the way it was presented was is if that was the sole cause, like 15, like people who were denied access to the appropriate bathroom, 59% of them commit suicide. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is 59% of those responding, and we've already identified that the respondents may be misleading, have contemplated suicide. But it's also possible that that 59% experienced a number of other negative experiences, which may have led to that. And it's quite possible, because this report identifies it, they may have had mental health issues. And when I say that, I don't mean, okay, you're transgender, that's a mental health issue. No, what I mean is you might have an underlying mental health issue that's unrelated, or maybe it is related, but you have an underlying health issue, or I'm sorry, mental health issue. And we don't know to what degree the 59% here had any mental health issue, but it's presented entirely out of context. So that's why I find looking up the information and reading through it very valuable. So let's go on, and we're going to skip over to page 14 here, and we're going to look at the discussion, and we're going to wrap this up a little bit here. So where are we here? All right, here we are. So, notwithstanding the several significant limitations of the NTDS data that we noted at the outset of this report, our analysis suggests some tentative findings related to risk and protective factors for suicide attempts among transgender and gender nonconforming adults. Two interrelated risk factors appear to be most strongly related to suicidal behavior among transgender and gender nonconforming adults. Number one, rejection, discrimination, victimization, and violence related to anti transgender bias. And number two, serious mental health conditions. So the report distinctly identifies that there are two things: you have your environment and you have your mental health condition. The question is, to what degree does environment play a role? Assume this, and we are making an assumption. Assume that people who did not respond to this might have been people that either did not experience it or simply didn't care because they don't have an underlying mental health condition. In other words, if your mental health condition is resolved or taken care of, we don't want to say resolved, but if it's managed, right? That may put you in a more resilient state to deal with what you perceive to be anti-transgender bias. And I say perceived to be because some of the items back on that list that we were looking at, where did it go here? Some of the items, it's not clear. It's not always clear whether that's the actual reason for, the bias is the actual reason for that experience. For instance, I did not get a job I applied for. How do we know that you didn't get the job that you applied for? Was it because you weren't the best candidate? You just thought you were? I mean, that's happened to me. I thought I was the best candidate, and clearly I wasn't in the past. And I did not get jobs. People don't get jobs all the time. So it's not clear whether the reason that you didn't get the job is because of anti transgender bias. It's also unclear where, if you were denied, say, a promotion or you lost your job, that it was specific to anti transgender bias. Now, some of the other things, they very well could be, likely are. I was harassed by somebody at work. If somebody's harassing you and they're saying negative things about being transgender, that is definitely anti transgender bias. And also, it's jerk behavior, and people need to knock it the hell off. So, There's a lot going on here in this study, and it is inappropriate, in my opinion, to go through and find the stats. I was trying to go back to my page here to go and find the stats, and then dig them up, and then give a presentation on this, presenting the information in the way that was done. Now, the question you might ask is, might say, DL, transgender folk, they're having a rough go, right? Can't you at least agree to that they're having a rough go and we need to help them out in any way we can? And the answer to that, I would say, no, not in any way we can. We need to give anybody the proper help that they need. When it comes to laws and regulations, which was what Adeline was mentioning, she was talking about the laws and regulations. Now, we should not be passing any law, regardless of whether it's in favor of transgender individuals or against transgender individuals. We shouldn't pass any law until we have truly identified a real problem to solve. Without solving an actual problem, then what we're really doing is we're solving a problem that may not exist. So let me give you an example, and then we'll call it a day on this show. Here in Jacksonville, hold on, let me take a drink of water here. All right, here in Jacksonville, years ago, roughly around 2017, I think actually, we had this big debate on whether or not we should pass an expanded human rights ordinance, which would include like transgender. And I argued with people about this. And two major things were presented to me. The number one was that people were being fired and having really negative experiences, but mostly being fired from their job for being transgender. And I was actually directed to the Williams Institute. I looked it up and I said, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing, at the time, I was basically seeing the same thing that I saw today. People were extrapolating on the data, making it mean something that it was either that it maybe didn't mean, or at least at the time was unclear whether it actually meant that or not. Um, and then the other thing was people would say, well, companies are refusing to come here until we pass expanded human rights ordinance. And I was like, which ones? Name some companies. And nobody really was giving me any names. One person did say Amazon. They said, well, Amazon won't come. And I said, oh, okay. So I looked into it. Well, it turns out in neighboring county, Hillsborough County, Amazon had set up a business there, set up a warehouse about a year prior to Hillsborough expanding their human rights ordinance. So I was really skeptical without more than just someone's word. This was just like some random person on the internet who was like, "Hey, Amazon." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, let me go look into this." And I look into it and I don't find where Amazon has done that before. Right. And at the time, the Hillsborough was only like a year prior or something like that. So the information didn't fit. Now, why is that important? Well, again, if we want people to get the proper help that they need, then we need to have our facts straight. We need to know what the facts do say and what they don't say. And when there's a question of the facts, when there's information that's unknown, we need to not run with it. We need to dig in further. As the Williams Institute own report said, their own report said, we need more information because there are deficiencies. There are things that we don't know for sure that goes into identifying what laws, if any, may be valuable. Otherwise, we're passing laws and that are going to make people feel good, but not actually address the problem. Again, if there even is one. Second of all, and this was a big thing for me back in 2017 when we were arguing over HRO, I said, you know, what's the message that you're sending people if you say we need a law that prevents people from being fired for being transgender, and we have to have this law, and we can't get it. We have to have it, and we can't wait. We got to have it. And then further to say, well, businesses aren't coming here. What's the harm in that? Well, the harm is you're sending a message that businesses don't want to come because you've got a bad community and that you might be fired. So you're telling people you might have to be worried about something that is not even true. It would be like saying, okay, be like me telling my son, there's a monster outside. Don't go outside at nighttime. I'm creating fear when there is no monster outside, right? Now, there might be other reasons to be fearful. Hey, don't go outside at night without a flashlight because you might run into a possum or some other animal, like a real animal, not a monster, right? Like, hey, don't go over here in the bushes because you might run into a snake, right? There might be real reasons to uh, to present to people that there's a concern to be addressed, but we cannot do the fake ones because we cannot resolve fake ones. We cannot we cannot pass in any amount of laws that will fix problems that don't exist or that we don't have a full grasp of. You simply can't do it. And then more importantly, you cause people to be fearful of things that may not be happening or may be so unlikely to happen that they don't need to worry about it. And if we're talking about a community that's already struggling, that already might have some mental health issues, why would we pile on even more just so that we can feel good about having done something? Because at the end of the day, when you pass a law that doesn't address a real problem, all you're doing is saying, I want to feel good about having done something. That's unacceptable. And you don't have to take a position. You don't even have to take a position on the issue of transgender in bathrooms. This is a standard common issue that everybody faces. People all over the place, no matter what group they're in, no matter how they identify, this is something that people face on the regular. And we should be doing this. We should be more diligent in the information that we put out. We should be more diligent in the laws and the regulations that we put forward. And we should be more diligent about the impact of what we're saying to the wider population than what we are. And we're not. So that's my show. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I apologize for being late. Try not to do that again. Be sure to catch me every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. And then on Sundays at 7 p.m., with my co host, Susan Hogarth, we're going to look across the vastness of tyranny here in the United States, and we're going to tell you what is happening in the Libertarian Party world because things are happening. I want you to be sure to do all the proper audience actions. I want you to go to youtube.libertydad.com or go to rumble.libertydad.com, whichever one is your favorite, or go to both and subscribe, like my videos, promote the videos, let people know like, hey, DL had this conversation. He addresses this. Drop me a comment in there. I try to read the comments as much as I can. In fact, let me take a look. No comments today. That's all right. No big deal. Sometimes they come up later. If you want to follow me on social media, do so at Liberty Dad on Facebook. Not really on there that often. Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter X, or email me libertydadpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time.